Thank you very much, Chairman, fellow panelists, distinguished delegates, ASEAN Indophiles, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be having this opportunity to address all of you on this juncture. I feel especially attached to this dialogue because I was involved in the structuring of the Delhi Dialogue number 1. And over the years, there's just no doubt that it has assumed a content and structure that reflects the dynamics both of India as well as that of ASEAN, especially ASEAN's internal dynamics of the political, economic, and the cultural pillars being reflected in the vision statement manufactured in 2012 here in Delhi at the time of the commemorative summit. If there is one thing that describes both India and ASEAN countries, it is the proportion of the young people in the population of the two entities. If I'm not mistaken, sometime in 2007, India started a system by which we accepted about, I think, 100 students or from 25 to 100 students from all 10 ASEAN countries put together, and every year they visit India. And now it's been 7 years, 7 batches must have come and gone. Now, those people, they must all have completed their graduation, must be knocking at the doors of employment, or they are probably self-employed. Now, it might be better for the Delhi Dialogue to really identify these people and find out what they think of what they saw in India then, what they saw back home in their country then, and what ideas for cooperation or future development of relations that they look forward to in the coming years. And because whatever we do in the Delhi Dialogue or any bilateral exchange, it is aimed towards the young. We don't expect the results to come in a year or so. We aim the results for about a 5-year time frame or a 10-year time frame, for which the target should be the young people who know India in the ASEAN countries and reverse also, if it's applicable. Talking of the reverse, I had the opportunity to go through the syllabus of history for the class 10 and 11 and 12 in the Indian Central Board of Secondary Education system. I was quite shocked to see neither under the, shall we say, the chapter under globalization, nor under the international relations or India's relations with neighboring countries, or for that matter in its own internal history, is there any mention of our looking east? There is no reference to the Chola Empire, which really established its from the 10th century onwards, its links right up to China, and of course all countries in Southeast Asia were involved in the trade and the commerce that existed, the so-called spice route, but on the eastern side. I think one suggestion that I have is that the syllabus for people in the higher classes in schools, that must include some reference to, they talk about globalization, and then the first chapter deals with how in 17th century, colonizers came. Yes, it was the first wave of globalization, no doubt. But what about the latest wave of globalization? Some reference should be made to that. So people should be told about our post-Cold War policy, foreign policy, particularly in the context of globalization, and in specifically if the authorities permit, maybe Look East policy could be made an element in that particular area. In the morning session on connectivity, we heard Professor Charit telling us about 20 million tourists coming to Thailand, about 10 million going up north, and of that another 5 million perhaps going even further north into the border regions of Myanmar, who in turn could be the, shall we say, the market for attracting via the trilateral corridor into India. While the trilateral corridor is being constructed and is being commissioned, there is already a possibility. The East-West Economic Corridor from Da Nang is already operational, if I'm not mistaken, certainly up to Mysore, and I'm sure if not up to Moil Mine, which is a port city in Myanmar. What is preventing us from having a boat service from Moil Mine to a port on the eastern coast to capture the market for Buddhist tourists? Now, all Buddhists may not be able to afford air travel. Right across the CLMV countries, there are many Buddhists who want to visit India just for paying obeisance at the Bodh Gaya. Let them congregate at Moil Mine. The catchment area is the CLMV countries. From there, certainly India can afford to, shall we say, operate in the non-monsoon season, operate a cruiser which can bring passengers across to some port on the east coast. Calcutta would be the best because Calcutta is connected to Gaya very well by a lot of trains. That could be, it's an infrastructure ready for use. All that we probably need is to give a lot of support for acquiring a ship and getting somebody to run that service well. And in the morning there was, I think, Mr. Sanjay Singh referred to the importance of rice cultivation and agriculture in particular right across Southeast Asia and India. Now, the sheer traditional knowledge among the farmers of all Southeast Asian countries and India is such a large database that we can rely on, because modern technology has its uses, but traditional knowledge should not be forgotten. Maybe a project to acquire all traditional knowledge in respective countries and then putting them in a database for which either people can use it for research or people can use it for, shall we say, environmentally friendly practices in agriculture, which does not leave a carbon footprint in any of the modern uses which it does. And over a period of time, this traditional knowledge, if it is collated and if it is accessible, not only for researchers but also for users in the modern context, it will be a tremendous boost for preserving knowledge, for using knowledge, and to build upon the knowledge using modern technology wherever it is feasible. Urbanization by 2050 or so, more than 50% of the population of India and practically all ASEAN countries are likely to live in urban areas. Now that brings with itself challenges. Now some countries have attempted to meet that challenge in a successful manner. Some countries have just begun. Some exchange of ideas on urbanization, particularly India is also urbanizing, but certain countries have tackled the problem in a different way, maybe with a smaller population. But exchange of ideas on urbanization is extremely important, and we need to focus on that in some future theme as far as Delhi Dialogue is concerned. One other thing, I think it was mentioned in the morning, I forget which panel, I personally feel that the Look East policy capital of India is Calcutta. All the things should be shifted there to be able to think geographically closely. But if Delhi Dialogue permits such a facility, why not hold Delhi Dialogue, 7, 8, 9, 10 in different cities, or at least parts of it in different cities, which have had some connection with the countries to the east of India, like maybe Chennai, maybe Visakhapatnam, maybe Orissa, some port in Orissa, or certainly Calcutta, if it can be held. It will be a good, shall we say, support for the dialogue process. To conclude, I'll just mention 2 points for the Delhi Dialogue as to how it should proceed towards in the future. First is, of course, regarding the timing. The second is the content. As far as the timing of the dialogue is concerned, it should be such that it feeds into the India-ASEAN summit. Ideas for consideration for the summit, normally it's, I think, held around the end of the year, October to December, depending on the country's convenience. And the Delhi Dialogue should feed into that summit by giving new ideas or by giving certain proposals which the leaders can consider, or they can work on an idea that the leaders have given them so that they can get back to them with their own ideas, because they have no, shall we say, shackles on their thinking. Secondly, some of the ideas that have emerged at the previous level, at the previous summits and all, some of them, I won't say they tend to get neglected, but some of them get lesser priority because a more important item overtakes that particular item. So maybe preparing a list and then seeing what is necessary for the cooperation to be built on. Maybe Delhi Dialogue could consider some of these ideas and build upon that over a period of time. Now, what are the organizations that are available? One is, of course, there are many, every country has its own centers of public policy. Lee Kuan Yew Institute is there in, just started I think it's called School of Government and Public Policy. It's going to be inaugurated in August this year in a place called Senkul. I do not know how far it is from Jakarta. So they are also starting. So every country is starting its own center for public policy, because all the decisions that are taken in these summits, as well as in track 1.5 and track 2 areas have a very clear impact on public policy, which means that if people who work in that area examine these issues, then it will be easier for the governments concerned to implement them. If this kind of a cooperation framework can be instituted, I'm sure it will help the progress of the Delhi dialogue in the coming years. Thank you very much for your attention.